to the God as described in the Bible. So if the Bible says that God did something, or that God has X or Y property, then that's part of the claim about God. That contributes to that defines what the God is that we're talking about. So
Yep.
if in Genesis, for example, it says, "And then God created all the rivers and shit," that's part of the claim about what God is.
Yep.
Are we agreed on that? Okay. Okay. And then also like what constitutes almost certainly, right? For me, like obviously almost certainly is a statement of probability. For me, it's going to be I would say safely if something has like a one like a um 1 in a billion chance of being true, it's almost certainly not the case. Would you agree with me?
I think so. Yeah.
All right, right. So for me, I'm going to be so then the point of my proposition here is basically like when we decompose that down, it's going to be like the God as described in the Bible has a probability of existing that's less than 1 in 1 billion. Um, okay,
Okay.
so basically to establish the probability of something, right? There are two things that go into that. The first thing is the prior probability, which is derived entirely from the complexity of the claim. And then there is you have to take into account the evidence. So because I'm going to be talking about what makes it improbable, I'm going to be talking purely about the prior probability because I think it's really low. And then I'll leave it up to you to provide evidence that would like raise that prior probability up to something that isn't less than 1 in a billion. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, man. So yeah, so I'm just going to be establishing the complexity. So to compute the prior probability of something, what we do is we divide one by the number of possible like alternate hypotheses plus one, right? So it's the number of so it's like if you're computing the prior probability of a coin flip, you'd say, what are the possibilities? Well, there's three possibilities for a coin flip's result. Either it like is heads, it's tails, or it like goes on the edge. So the prior probability would be 1 in 3 of it being on the edge or on the head side or the tail side. But then you'd like flip it a million times and you'd notice that it always comes up heads or tails, and like only 1 in like 1 billion times does it ever come up on the edge. And then you'd adjust the prior probability with the evidence that you've observed, right? Okay,
Yep.
so the complexity of the God claim, I'm gonna argue, is like really high. Okay, so I'm just like running through Genesis real quick. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This could be true or false. That's one bit of information in the claim. So currently we have 1 in 2 is the probability, so 50%. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now we're 1 in 4, right? Because they're independent. Then we have, and God saw that the light was good. Now we're 1 in 8. God called the light day and the darkness night. Those are actually separate claims, so we're up to 1 in 32, and so on and so forth. So the complexity of the claim or the probability is going to be 1 divided by 2 to the power of the number of independent claims made about God in the Bible. I've done a quick little bit of research here, and it's upwards of 4,000 claims. Um, so even if we were going to be super generous and claim that most of those are going to be dependent on one another, I'm going to say that we stick with, let's say, only 31 of the claims in the Bible are actually uh, independent of one another. We already have a probability of 1 in 2 billion, roughly. So I'm going to claim that, in fact, it's bigger than 31 independent claims because a lot of these are pretty specific. A lot of them are things like God said, "Let there be space between the waters to separate the waters of the heaven from the waters of the earth." This isn't going to be dependent on anything else. This is a pretty this everything else in the Bible could be true without this being true, and so on and so forth. So I estimate that there's probably at least probably like 1,000 independent claims in the Bible. So we're talking 1 divided by 2 to the power of 1,000, which is astronomically large, or astronomically small. much smaller than 1 in 1 billion. So there's the prior probability.
Okay, so yeah, so I feel like my whole point would be kind of disregarding that whole thing, then that like just because God in the Bible makes claims about certain things, like let there be light, let there be water, whatever he says, that's not one of the possibilities of the universe existing.
Right. So we're not talking about like
So-
we're not the claim that we're talking about isn't like the universe was created by God versus the universe was created by any of these other possibilities. The claim in question is that there's this entity that exists that
Yeah, so
matches the description in the Bible. So it's not just about how the universe was created, it's also about like all the particulars of what the other things that God did.
yeah, so my bad. Let me rephrase. So when God says let there be light or let there be water, that's not a possibility of whether God exists or not. The possibility is pretty much zero. Him saying, like the Bible saying that God said there let there be light, does not increase the likelihood of God existing.
No, it decreases it because it's adding more complexity to the claim of what God is.
No, it doesn't change the probability at all. It's just some words saying what
No,
God is apparently.
no, it's like so what we agreed upon at the start, right, is that like every claim made about God in the Bible is part of the claim of what the Christian God is, right? So when we say like
Yeah,
God
but
exists, we have to decompose what God is to figure out how complex that claim is. And God in this case is highly complex because there's so many like things claimed about him in the Bible.
yeah, what things claiming about him, like people making claims about him, does not increase the likelihood of him existing.
I know it doesn't increase it, it decreases it. But like, okay, so I think we're going back on what we agreed to in the beginning, but that's fine. I think maybe you didn't quite get what I was saying at that point. But um so I agree with you in general. Like if I just say like Riven is a dude, or if I say if I claim Riven is a banker or something, that doesn't like spontaneously make you less probable to exist, right? However, if we are defining, like if we're talking about, if I just say um, unicorns exist, then we have to take into account how complex is that claim? Like what are all the things that you're saying when you say that a unicorn exists? What are like because you can say like A and B, and that's like maybe two claims or something, right? You could think about it like that. Like, or you could say like A or B. That's like your claim. But if you look into A and it's actually like a whole bunch of possibilities within A, and there's a whole bunch of possibilities within B or something, then you have to take those into account. So like the abstraction level of like your actual words isn't enough. It's not like it doesn't like if you say a simple sounding sentence, that doesn't mean that your claim's complex. You have to figure out like how many possible alternatives there are. So if you say like God exists, and what you mean by God exists is a guy who said a guy who in the beginning created the heavens and the earth, and whose spirit was hovering over the surface of the waters, and who said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and so on and so forth. And you go through every single claim made about God in the Bible, and you say that guy exists. That's a much more complex claim.
Okay, it being complex doesn't increase the likelihood of it existing. So just
Actually,
because
it does.
God,
Yes.
okay,
So so
could you explain how it being complex increases the likelihood of it existing?
Well, no, you keep like flipping what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying
I
that it
un,
increases. I'm not saying it increases the likelihood. I'm saying it decreases the likelihood of it existing. Do you get that, first of all?
I no, I thought your point was that God was complex and therefore it does not have it
Okay,
does not have the chance of it being unreal.
okay, I'm saying God, when you're figuring out like whether something, what the probability of something being true is, you have to first assess the prior probability of it being true. And the prior probability of it being true is inversely proportional to the complexity of the claim. So in other words, the more complex the claim is, the less probable it is to be true.
Okay, I got you. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right. So do you agree with me now about that, or
I understand what you're saying, but
Okay.
in the other way, I wouldn't say that God is real just because he isn't complex. If that's what you're saying.
Wait, do you? I feel like. Wait, I think you might be a little bit confused about what your proposition here is. Like, I'm saying that God is almost certainly non-existent, right?
Yeah, you're trying to prove that he's non-existent. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. No. I mean, it's if something is less complex, then it's more likely that they exist. Yes, that's also true.
Yeah, I don't think complexity or lack thereof determines whether something is real or not.
Okay. I mean, this is just a basic this is basic theorem of probability theory, right? Like to determine the probability of an event, right? You have to take the let me just like link some random shit here. Uh the debate chat, like I don't know. That like look at it like in the it's like pre-algebra. You look at the like the first page, it just says find the probability of an event given the number of favorable outcomes and the total number of outcomes possible, right? So like you look at how many probable like what is the if you're talking about distinct possibilities, then you say 1 divided by the total number of outcomes that aren't that, right? Um, if it's the probability of like drawing a heart when you draw a card from a deck, you take the probability of like you take the number of hearts divided by the total number of cards, right? But if you're talking about like, but the other way you could do it is just say it's 1 divided by the number of suits in the deck, right? And then you could take into account the evidence by taking into account, okay, maybe in some weird decks there's more hearts than there are clubs or something, and then you'd have to update that. But um,
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think I get you now. Yep.
yeah, and it's Occam's razor as well if you want to think about it that way. But actually, like the probability theory says a lot more than Occam's razor does, but Occam's razor is kind of subsumed by the probability theory. Um, So yeah, like every time in the Bible, especially like I mean, it's a little bit hazier if it's a claim about something God did, I guess. But there's a lot of claims in the Bible about what God is as well, and every single one of those adds to the complexity of the claim. And like to see how many possibilities there are of a claim, like you figure out like what are the possibilities if someone says God has red hair and they say God is a dark skinned or something, then you'd say, okay, so first of all, we got two possibilities from them being they could have red hair or they could not have red hair, and then you have another two possibilities they could be dark skinned or not be dark skinned. So now you have four total permutations of those possibilities, right? So you take 2 to the power of the number of independent variables. And in the Bible, there's like fuckloads of independent variables because there's so many claims made about God.
Yeah, I understand that, but a lot of the claims about God in the Bible, like a lot of those are together. So when they say
Yeah.
God created light or God created the water, that is one claim. It's not. It's those aren't independent claims
Well, they are though.
because that.
You
Wait. So
no, they are right because God could create the light and not create the water, and God could create the water and not create the light. So it's not about like linguistically the sentence structure, like are they separate claims, like in that way. What you do is you look at are they independent variables? Could they occur? Could one occur and the other not? Right?
okay. So you're saying. Okay, so you're saying the total number of outcomes, so basically
Yeah.
all the possible outcomes that exist, uh, yeah, divided by or so the what's it called? The formula you just gave in that link you just sent. You would say if you went and put that through God in the Bible, you would have a less than 1 in a million chance of God existing.
Yeah, because you say so the number of favorable outcomes is 1. It's that particular God. And then you say the total number of outcomes is 2 to the power of all of the independent variables that are in the Bible. So yeah. The only like all I have to do to claim that the number is actually smaller than 1 in a billion is say that I mean, I could do a quick logarithm, but I know for a fact that 2 to the power of 31 is 2 billion. So as long as there's 31 independent claims made about God in the Bible, there's my claim follows logically. And I know there's more than that. I just ran down like a random like article, and it showed like 31 passages about characteristics of God, and then there's like the entire rest of the Bible. I mean, just going through Genesis makes it lists like a fuckload of them.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, wouldn't this all just be one claim that God exists and this is what he has done?
Yeah, like the point is, right, you can set it to that, right? But the fact is that all of those it's actually way more complex than I'm making it out to be, because you have to, like, in order to get an objective, like, actual determination of the probability, you'd have to do some crazy shit where you like you make a computer program that simulates God, and do it in the least number of lines of code possible. That's how you actually find out what the exact what the exact complexity of something
Wait,
is, right?
no, so that's the chance of like a computer going through and doing these exact options. Whereas when the Bible is talking about like God and what God has done, it isn't talking about some physics chance of what God has done. It is talking about what He has done. It
Yeah,
is
no, like
specifically outlining what He has done and nothing else. It's not anything to do with chance.
no, like okay, so the problem, it's a problem of abstraction, right? Like if you're the point you're making like is a good example of the problem of abstraction when you're counting probabilities, right? Like you're saying like, okay, well, the entire Bible could be seen as just one single claim. Either all that's true or all
Yeah,
of
I
that's
would.
false, right?
Yeah, I would say
I
it's just one claim that God
yeah.
exists and this is what He has done, and that's it.
Yeah. So you could also say, right, like, okay, how many possibilities are when you win the lottery, right? What is the probability of winning the lottery? Well, to do this, what you do is you see how many possible permutations, how many possible like tickets could you draw, and how many are there that actually win. One divided by the number of tickets. That's the probability. But under your model, what you do is you'd say there's two possibilities. Either you win or you don't. 50-50 chance, right? So clearly there's a problem with this reasoning. So the problem is with like the abstraction level that you're talking about. You actually have to figure out what are the things that count as independent events. What are the things? How sensitive is it? If you get
I-
a different yeah, like how
Yeah,
many what's yeah.
yeah, no, I think your logic is wrong here. In this example, it would be there are two people that could win the lottery, and like one person has a 50% chance, the other one has a 50% chance, and this person won. Like,
Um
like in the
right, but
example of the
okay,
Bible,
so
it
to
is not a whole bunch of different tickets or like options. It is one
But right,
fact that God exists
but
and this is what He
there's
has done.
not. But the fact is that there's not only two possibilities about God, right? Like there could be, it could be that God is
Well,
exactly
there
the way
is.
that
It's
it is.
either He exists or He doesn't. That's it.
No,
There is
I
no
get what you're
nothing
saying.
else.
I get what you're saying, but it could be that God exists in the exact way, or it could be that God exists in the exact same way, except that he didn't say, let there be light at the start of creation, but everything else is the same, right? Or it could be that he did say, let there was light, but he didn't say that, but he didn't see that the light was good, and so on. So actually, there are other possibilities, right? You can frame it like there aren't, but like that's not how probabilities are actually counted in probability theory. And there is a problem of like it is ambiguous what level of abstraction you actually take it down to, and that's why I was bringing up the computer simulation thing, because that's the way that people have theorized is how you would actually get the objective complexity of something. But the way I'm doing it is like it's at least this low. The probability is at least this low. The complexity is at least as high as I'm doing it. Because of course, when God says, when it claims that God created the heavens and the earth, that's actually an immensely more complex claim than 50-50. There's like so many things that are going on in that claim. The heavens and the earth. Okay, actually, that's two claims already. They created the heavens and they created the earth. But like, what does it mean to like create the heavens and the earth? It's actually much more complex than just like 30 like a 25% chance, right? um so I see what you're saying, but
Yeah,
it's a classic
yeah.
problem of
So
counting and probability theory, but that's just not how it's done. You can ask like
yeah,
any mathematician about probability, but
Yeah, so instead of taking the one claim that God exists and this is what he has done, you're taking every single possible thing that God has done and saying that is one claim.
Yeah, because they're not. It's not just all one claim, right? Like they don't just like Christians don't
Well,
come up to
it
you and
is just
say
one claim. It is just one claim that God exists and this is what he has done. That is one claim.
that
So
would
you're
be
you're
because
basically just separating it down into many claims to try to argue a point.
yeah, I'm separating it down into many claims because that's how you count probabilities and
But you
probability
haven't
theory. Like that's
explained
how
why
it's done.
but you haven't explained why you should be separating them down into these claims. The one
Yes, I
claim was
have.
like,
Yes, I
so
have. Like
the one
uh,
claim was that God exists and this is what he's done. You can't explain to me why we should be separating these claims
I
down.
yes, okay. That's why I was talking about the lottery thing, right? So like if what you're saying is true, then we can have it to whatever size of abstraction we want, right? We can just say that either God is real or God isn't real. Either you win the lottery or you don't win the lottery. If that was true, then there would be a 50% chance of winning the lottery. We know that's not true, therefore your logic is flawed, right? Modus tollens. Like
No,
that's
because
as yeah, it's as strong an
no,
argument
because
as anyone could give. Yeah.
no, because in this example there is no percentage. There's no percentage chance that God is real or not. It is either he's real or he's not. Same as whether you either win the lottery or you
Lottery
do
or
not.
you don't. Right. Of course,
There is
there's
no percentage chance of that.
indeed right. Yeah. Like so of course like there's you either win the lottery or you don't. So you take one divided by two and you say you have a 50% chance of winning the lottery.
No, no, there is no percentage chance. You either
But
win
that's
or
how
you
you
don't.
calculate.
Same way God either exists or he does not exist. There
No,
is no
but that's
percentage chance of that.
yes, there is. That's how probabilities work. What do you mean? Are you just saying that probabilities don't exist like at all?
Probabilities do not probabilities do not exist to an idea such as God. No,
Oh, so it's special to God.
it's special to ideas. Yes.
But it's not an idea, right? It's a claim
So
about like a thing existing.
okay. So if one person says that ghosts exist, you can't say
Yeah.
there is a percentage chance that ghosts do exist based on what this person says. It's either
Yes,
they
you
are
can.
lying and they don't exist, or they do exist. There is
Yeah,
no
if you
percentage
wanted
chance of that.
that's not true. What you do is
Or
you'd
can you
first like
explain how there is a percentage chance of that?
yes, like okay, so if you're saying if you make a claim such as ghosts exist, right? You have to like and then you're asking, should I believe that ghosts exist? Is this claim true or false? What's the probability of it being true? So like you have to take into account the probabilities, right? But not all claims are created equal. Some of them are more complex than others and need more evidence therefore, right? So like the way you determine that is you have this prior probability and then you have the likelihood ratio, which is like the representation of the evidence, and you multiply those together. You multiply the likelihood ratio of the new piece of evidence by the current like prior probability that you've established so far, and you update that probability given the new evidence, right? But you need the prior probability, otherwise you've got nothing to multiply together. And it's a proven theory. It's a proven theorem of probability theory. Like you need the prior probability, and the way you
Yeah.
establish that is you take one divided by the total number of like mutually exclusive hypotheses that are like
Yes.
yeah. So
Yes, I would say there is no prior possibility to whether a god exists. He either exists or he doesn't. There is no prior
yeah,
possibility there.
but there's also like there's uh there's no possibility, there's no probabilities about whether or not you win the lottery. You either win or you don't, right? There's only two possibilities, but there's also a billion possibilities. Either you win, or this other person wins, or this other person wins, or this other person wins, and you go on a billion times, right? It's just a linguistic thing, it's an abstraction thing. But when you actually are trying to compute the chance of winning the lottery, you have to take one divided by the total number of tickets. And when you're trying to compute the actual probability of God existing, you have to take one divided by all of the number of possible permutations of the claims of the truth
So,
values of
so
the
that would
claims
be
that are
the
made about God.
so that would be the prior possibility. As I just said, there isn't a prior possibility to whether God exists or not.
Yeah, but I'm just showing like the ludicrousness of that claim by saying like if you were correct about that, then you would say that the probability of winning the lottery is 50%.
No, because things can. No, because different things could. Some things can have prior possibility, and other things cannot.
Where are you getting this from? This is not a thing.
What do you mean it's not a thing? You need to actually
Well,
explain why it's not a thing instead of just saying it's not a thing.
no, I'm just saying, like, that's not anything, like,
Like,
that's not a thing in
I
probability theory.
don't care. I don't care what you think. You need to actually explain it.
Uh, but no, I'm
So,
just saying, I'm
explain
just
to me
explaining
why.
the lack of what the lack of that concept in probability theory. I can't explain the lack of something. If you want, explain to me why there's this distinguishing factor between God and lotteries that makes it so that God doesn't have a prior probability and lotteries do. But
Because God is an
everything
idea.
does.
Because God is an idea out of our out of our current experience that we do not have any knowledge of. Whereas lottery is something we do have knowledge of.
Can you explain how that has anything to do with prior probabilities?
Well,
Like, that's
like,
a difference, granted. Why is it
yeah,
relevant?
yeah. So if we were going to have some sort of prior possibility about God, then we need to know that there is a possibility, a like percentage possibility of something being different. Whereas we do not know that.
No, like, no, that's not the case. When you flip a coin, right? You don't know that there's any chance of it coming up heads, right? If you believe in a deterministic worldview or something, or if you're deciding like what's the probability of this person being guilty, well, you don't know if they're guilty or not. So you don't know if there's any chance of them being guilty. That's why we use probabilities in the first place, is to reason about things that we don't know, to determine how likely it is that it's true, given that we
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, but that person being guilty is an existence that is in our which is in our perspective, whereas God is something outside of our perspective.
Okay. I mean, I've never heard that theorem of probability theory where they say like you can have you like things that are outside of your perspective, quote unquote, don't have prior probabilities. But
I mean, like, I don't care if you haven't heard it.
well, like, have you? Where is it? Please cite your source. What is this?
What do you mean, cite my source?
Well,
Cite my
like this
source
is a
for what?
mathematical claim.
What do you? How is it a mathematical claim to say that we do not have any prior understanding of how God exists because we cannot perceive Him?
Prior understanding is not what I mean by prior probability, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, but you need some sort of perspective and
No,
understanding of God
like
to have
no.
some sort of prior possibility. Right?
Well, to establish the prior probability, to actually know what the prior probability is, you have to know what the claim is, right? But we do know what the claim is, right? We don't know what's actually true, but we know what the claim is. It's what's said in the
Well,
Bible.
well, no, we don't really have any sort of perspective of what God is. So no.
I didn't say we did. We have a like we do. We know exactly what God is because it's defined in
No,
the
we
Bible.
don't. No, we don't.
Yeah, we do. We do. Right? Like the Bible says, this is what God is. When I'm coming into this debate, me and you both agreed on the definition of the Christian God. It is what is
Yeah,
described
but
in the
we have
Bible.
not. Yes, but we
If
have
some
not
right,
perceived God.
we don't have to. So if there's something that
Or we do
exists,
have to.
if there's something that exists that matches all the claims in the Bible, then that's God. If there's anything else, that's not God. We know exactly what God is. The question is whether or not God exists, right? And the
We
way we
have
figure
not
this
perceived
out is
God.
through prior probability.
You said.
We
You
don't have
said we
to.
have. You said. I guess wait. You said you did. We have perceived God. So we have not perceived God. We have no way of perceiving God. Therefore, we cannot have any sort of prior specific. I don't know the word. Some sort of prior knowledge of him. Therefore, we wouldn't have any sort of knowledge of whether or not like he does exist or not. So we can't have any sort of prior percentage chance of whether it exists or not.
Right, like prior probability is about claims, not about if you're trying to figure out like what is the probability of some murderer being a man or a woman. Like you're not going to be sitting there and saying like, well, I don't know their name. Oh, I don't know like what they look like. I don't know this that, right? Like you just take into account what's the probability of any murderer being a woman, then you take into account the evidence, et cetera, right? You just look at the claim. You just look at the complexity of the claim.
Yeah,
You see it, look at the
yeah, and
prior
that's
probability, right?
so that murder example you just gave. That is part of our perspective. That is part of our knowledge. We can perceive that. We cannot perceive God. We don't have not have. We do not have knowledge about God.
Right, but this is just special pleading for God, right? It's like there's nothing actually
I
distinguishing God. Like
I mean you.
you're
I
saying
mean, you
God is
can call it
different.
special. You can call it special pleading if you want, but like that doesn't kind of disprove my point.
Well, it shows that you're claiming that your claim is fallacious, right? That your argument is fallacious, right? You're saying
How's
that
it
there's this
fallacious?
you're saying that there's this distinguishing factor between God and like everything else that makes it so that
No,
God isn't subject to prior
no.
probability and probability
I'm
theory, whereas other
no.
things are, but like you haven't
I
shown
mean,
what
can
the
I
actual
respond to that?
factor is.
Can I
Yes.
respond to that since you're misrepresenting me? I'm saying there is a difference between having some sort of prior probability towards something we can perceive in our own like reality and something that we do not have any sort of way of perceiving, such as God.
Wait, okay, please tell me, like, why does our level of perception or God being outside of our realm of perception, what does this have to do with prior probability?
I mean, can you explain how you can have some sort of prior possibility, prior probability about something that you can't even perceive? Like,
Yes, I mean, you just like prior probability is just about claims. It's just about the complexity of the claim. You just take the number of possibilities, one divided by the number
yeah,
of
but
possibilities, and compute the number
and where do those claims come from?
by like so the number of claims is just like the number of
Yeah,
truth
where do they?
variables,
Yeah,
the
someone
number of
else.
Boolean
Where do those
variables that make
claims
it up.
come from? Where do those claims come from?
The person making the claim.
Yeah, so in the Bible, and because we can't have any sort of perspective about God, then how would we have any sort of prior probability there?
The perspective is irrelevant. You still haven't told me how that comes into anything. Like all we've been talking about is who's making the claim. The people in the Bible are making the claim. That's where the claims come from. You count the
Yeah,
number of like
yeah, no, yeah,
possibilities,
no,
right?
as I said, those claims come from people who do not have any sort of uh, perspective on whether God exists or not. So you can't use those
That's
claims to
that's
disprove
irrelevant.
God. That's
That's
not
irrelevant.
irrelevant. You can say it's
It
irrelevant, or you need to explain why it's irrelevant.
I will, yeah. So like when you say like the lottery, like here's the probability of a lottery. You don't have to know like who has the lottery ticket in order to in order to figure out what the probability is. And similarly, like if you're making claims about unicorns, right? You don't have to say like this like you don't have to have this like inside knowledge into the most unicorn-like thing that exists in the world, right? You're just making this claim about this fictional thing, right? That may or may not exist, but you're just making it up on the spot, right? So like regardless of whether or not God actually exists or does not actually exist, there is a claim that's made by humans on Earth, and they don't have to there's nothing it's not relevant whatsoever
Yeah,
whether or not
yeah,
they
okay, yeah,
yeah.
okay. So you can make the claim that humans are wrong, but you can't make the claim that that God doesn't exist.
No, that's not true. Like there is a I'm first of all I'm not claiming that God doesn't exist. I'm saying that the probability from our perspective, given the evidence that we currently have, is that God is almost certainly non-existent, right?
Yeah,
Because there's so many
I'm saying that that possibility you're thinking of applies to whether or not the people writing about God are correct, not whether or not he exists or not.
um no, because like again, like God, quote unquote, is defined as what the claim that is made in the Bible. So if people are wrong about God, if the God that is described in the Bible does not exist, then God doesn't exist because that's what God is the claim made in the Bible, right? If you want to widen it so that we're talking about any like manifestation of God, any formulation of God, then I've got to make a different argument. Like then it's a much
Not,
simpler claim, right?
yeah, I'm saying the argument you're giving applies against the people making claims about God, not about God itself.
I know what you said. I just responded to it, man. That's not the case. Like if you grant that it applies to whether or not people are correct about God, then you're committed to the conclusion that that it applies to the existence of God. Because if people are wrong about God, then that God doesn't exist. Because people are making claims in the
That
Bible about
that
this
doesn't make any
God.
sense.
It
Wait,
does
so
though.
you
It
wait, so
does though
you're
because God
yeah,
is
wait,
defined as the claim that's made in the Bible. So if that God doesn't exist, then God doesn't exist. If they're wrong about that, then God
how does
doesn't
that
exist.
okay, so how does it make any sense? Just because people are wrong about God, that doesn't mean God doesn't exist.
I agree that that is not a logical claim right there, but that's not
Okay, so
exactly the claim I'm
why do
making.
you make that? Well, that is the claim you made. You said that if the people are wrong about, if the people who made the Bible are wrong about the claims they made about God, then that means God doesn't exist.
No, because I'm also
That
introducing
is what you said.
No, because I'm also introducing other premises to the argument, right? That
No,
have to do with
that
probability theory.
is what you said word for word.
It's not what I said word for word. Like I'm
I
also
mean,
introducing. There's
you
more.
can backtrack all you want, but sure.
No, yeah, like
Go
let
on.
me explain what the actual argument is, right? The actual argument is that, as we agreed at the start, the Christian God that we're talking about, this being that may or may not exist, this idea of a being, is defined as the claims that are made in the Bible, right? So if there is no such thing in the universe that meets those claims, right? That's what we'd mean by saying people are wrong about God. There isn't a thing that meets all the claims in the Bible, then
Yeah.
therefore the Christian God does not exist. That's what I'm
Yes.
arguing for. I'm not arguing that no God exists. I'm arguing that the Christian God, that as portrayed by the Bible, does not exist.
Yeah. So people being wrong about God doesn't mean He doesn't exist.
Okay, we're going around in circles. I think we've said what
I'm
we need to say. Unless you've got some other arguments, I say we put it to a vote. And I'll throw down a final remarks if you want. Sure. So like again, just to recap. So we agreed at the start that the Christian God is defined as, the being which is referred to like in the Bible. It is just a being that meets all of the claims that are in the Bible. It is a being, if we run through Genesis, it is a being that created the heavens and the earth in the beginning. It is a being that was hovering over the surface of the waters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is a being that meets all of the claims that are made in the Bible. So that's the being that we're talking about. To determine the probability of something, you first have to establish the prior probability, which is computed by taking 1 and dividing that by 2 to the power of the number of independent claims made about, or like the number of independent parts of the claim, which in this case is all the claims made in the Bible about God, which is easily larger than 31, which is all that I need in order to support my claim. We, of course, would then have to take into account the amount of like evidence that would be in support of God, but none, sadly, has been presented. So we'd have to just say that the probability of God existing is less than 1 in 2 billion, in fact, and therefore is almost certainly non-existent by the definition that me and Riven both agreed upon at the start.
Yeah, and I would say everything you just said there applies to the claims made about people who made the Bible, not about God itself.